Jayom Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajakracharya Asatara Sata Sri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura Ki Jai. Gaur Premananda. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to His divine glories, Srila Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura Maharaj Ki Jai. So we're gathered here today on the occasion of the Disappearance Day of Srila Prabhupada's spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura Maharaj Ki Jai. So there's a notice here to read something about the disappearance of Revatanandana Prabhu. Was this read already? Okay, it says please read. From Kumkum Devi Dasi. It's with a heavy heart and blessings from his family who aren't on Facebook that I want to tell everyone that last night, December 16th at 11:45 p.m. Hawaii time, His Grace Revati Nandan, formerly Swami, passed away in Honolulu after a short illness which was diagnosed as lymph cancer. I'll just explain that. He was a cousin of Vishnu John Swami, and he did a lot of service for Srila Prabhupada in places like England and India. He was very knowledgeable in the philosophy, was a sannyasi for some time. Okay. So Kumkum continued to explain. He was my partner for 5 years, about 6 years after having been married to his first wife, Puspanjali Dasi, and having a child, Neela Chandra Das. He was first cousin to Vishnu John Swami, who brought him to ISKCON in 1968. He had been living as a recluse alone for many years on the south part of the island of Hawaii. His first wife was in touch with him and helped him through his last days. They were reluctant to send him to the hospital, but had no choice. His son Neela was on a telemedicine TV as he passed, so he was not alone. When Srila Prabhupada ordered him sannyas, Prabhupada said, "If you don't succeed in sannyas, then find yourself a good wife." As per the request from the family of Revatananda, who passed on December 16th in Honolulu, they asked for this quote in his memory. He reasons ill who tells that Vaishnavas die when thou art living still and sound. The Vaishnavas die to live, and living try to spread the holy name around. That's by Bhaktivinoda Thakura. Okay. So, in preparing for this class, I decided to study the talks that Srila Prabhupada gave on the Disappearance Day of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura. And he gave 5, maybe 6 talks that are recorded on the Veda base. 2 of them were given here in Los Angeles, one in 1968 and the other in 1973. So I found that he repeated several themes in all of the classes that he gave. In the lecture in 1968 here in Los Angeles, Srila Prabhupada started out with recounting how a sadhu, gave blessings to different categories of people, to the Rajaputra, the prince. He said, Chiram Jiva, live forever. Because when the prince is alive, he's got all kinds of wealth and opportunity to engage in sense gratification. And it's very likely that a person in that position with a lot of wealth, opulence, and power will engage in selfish activities of sense gratification in violation of the principles of Dharma or religion. And because of that, in the next life, the soul of that person, that person's next life, in that next life, they're going to experience the reactions to that. They're going to experience horrible reactions to their activities of selfish sense gratification. So the sage says, best that you just keep on living, because as soon as you die, you're gonna suffer. So to the Muni Putra, the son of a Muni or Sadhu, in other words, a brahmachari who's strictly following the principles of Vedic culture, the sadhu said, Ma Jiva, don't live any longer, because of your austerities and your practices of sadhana, you are going to become elevated in your next life. So why put up with all of the difficulties of life in this material world? Just accept the results of your austerities and practices. For the butcher, there are different categories of people, but for the butcher, he said, don't live, don't die, because your existence in this world, performing these horrible activities, is very miserable, and when you die, it's also going to be miserable when you experience the reactions. So, for the devotee, the bhakta, the sadhu advised, you can live, you can die. It's the same, because you're performing devotional service, you're situated in ecstasy, whether here or there, in this world or the next. So, Srila Prabhupada used that example to say the appearance or the disappearance of the pure devotee, the great acharya like Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, is the same. Of course, he pointed out in some of his talks that, yes, there is some feeling of separation. That can also be there. But in reality, the pure devotee is doing the same thing, whether he's appearing in this world to carry out his mission to Krishna and Lord Chaitanya, or whether he's left this world. He's always engaging in this same activity. So, Srila Prabhupada would point that out. But, as he said, sometimes the feeling of separation is there. Like, there's this famous poem or offering that Srila Prabhupada wrote on the occasion of the disappearance of his spiritual master when he was still in India before he came to the West. And he noted, in that essay or poem, that when a great acharya disappears, there can be a lot of disturbance. So this was another theme that Srila Prabhupada usually touched on when he was kind of getting towards the end of a Disappearance Day lecture about Bhaktisiddhanta. He would recall how he had received the order to preach in the West, to preach to the English-speaking people of the world. He received that order in 1922 when he was, he said 24 years old, but actually he probably would have been around 26 if he was born in 1896. 1922, he would have been 26. So he said at that time he was the leader among his friends. And he explained that yes, he had that leadership ability. He said once an astrologer read his hand and said, "Your order will be executed." In other words, what he would be a leader. He would give direction, and it would be followed. But in any case, one of his friends, one of his acquaintances, told him that he'd heard that this sadhu, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, was coming to speak in a place called Ultadanga in Calcutta. And this friend of his told him he's a great sadhu. And at that time, Srila Prabhupada recalled, he was a member of Gandhi's independence movement. And he was thinking in a certain way. And he says, "I've seen so many sadhus. They come and visit us at our house. My father welcomes them, but I'm not very impressed by them. So I don't want to go. I don't think I'll go. You go." But his friends regarded him as the leader, and Srila Prabhupada said they persuaded him that no, you may not like him, but we need your opinion, whether he's bona fide or not, so we can decide whether or not to associate with him. So on that basis, okay, he was their leader, they needed his opinion of this, although he wasn't personally interested. He said, "Okay, I'll go." So they went to that place. I think ISKCON has acquired that place, the house or building at Ultadanga in Calcutta, on the roof of which Srila Prabhupada and his friends met Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura in 1922. So at that meeting, as soon as these young men walked in, Bhaktisiddhanta could understand what types of people they were. And he said, "You're all educated young men. Why don't you spread these teachings to the English-speaking world?" And Srila Prabhupada, at that time, Abhay Charan Day, he recalls that he replied, "Well, why should anybody listen to us? We're Indians, we're under the rule of the British, we're not independent." You know, in other words, he was speaking in terms of Gandhi's philosophy that India had to become independent, and only then would people listen. And he said, "But I was defeated." And he said, although I was in Gandhi's movement, I had been raised as a devotee of Krishna, as a devotee of Lord Chaitanya. So in my heart, you know, I had that, although superficially I was involved in Gandhi's movement, in my heart, I was a devotee of Radha and Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. And he said, I could understand that, yes, he was right. He defeated me, and that's a good thing. So when Srila Prabhupada and his friends left the meeting, they asked him, "What do you think?" His friends asked him, "What do you think of this personality, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura?" And he said, this is the right man, the right person to spread Lord Chaitanya's teachings in this world. So he said at that time, he accepted him within his heart as his spiritual master. So that was in 1922. And then the next year, 1923, Srila Prabhupada said he moved his family to Allahabad, from Calcutta. And he began his business there, which was called Prayag Pharmacy. And after he said, I always kept in my heart this idea that, yes, I met a very nice sadhu, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So in 1928, some members of the Gaudiya Math came to open a center in Allahabad in connection with Kumbh Mela, which was being held there, a big festival. So these Gaudiya Math devotees, they were talking to different people in Allahabad, different Vaishnavas and Hindus, and trying to get some support. And several of them mentioned to them, no, you should go see this Abhay Babu at Prayag Pharmacy. He's a very religious man. He'll help you. So they did that. They went, and he was very glad to see them, and therefore his connection with his spiritual master's institution kind of began again. And he actively served the mission of the Gaudiya Math. And on a couple of occasions, met Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura, who said, I like him. I like this boy because he listens. There was one festival where devotees of the Gaudiya Math, they had some opportunity to go on parikrama or listen to a talk by Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. So many of them went on the parikrama, but Srila Prabhupada, he stayed and listened, very attentively to the teachings of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati. And Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur noticed that. He noticed, yes, this boy, he's sitting very nicely and hearing. He likes to hear. So he was recognized in that way. But he didn't receive formal initiation until 1933. And then in 1936, only a few years later, he heard that Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati was feeling a little bit ill, and he was staying in Jagannath Puri to rest and recover. So in December of 1936, around the 9th or 10th, Srila Prabhupada said, I wrote a letter to my spiritual master, and I wrote to him, your sannyasi disciples and your other disciples in the Gaudiya Math, they're doing direct service for you, but I'm just a householder doing my business, and I'm wondering, is there anything I can do? How can I serve you? And on December 13th, Srila Prabhupada said he received back a letter from Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. And in that letter, he repeated the same instruction that he had given on their first meeting in 1922. And that was, yes, if you spread this movement, if you spread Lord Chaitanya's teachings in the English language to the English-speaking world, that will be very good for you, and it'll be very good for the people that you reach. So he said, okay, I had this order. I didn't have any real direct, explicit plan how I was going to do it, but I was always meditating on that order. And in that regard, he mentioned Vishnuvat Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on a verse from Bhagavad Gita, Vyavasayatmaka buddhir ekaha kuro nandana bahushaka hinantascha buddhayo vyavasayanam. That the verse says the intelligence of one who is fixed, as a devotee, is single, there's a single focus. The devotee is very single-minded, whereas the intelligence of those who aren't very serious is all diverted into many different branches. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary explicitly relates it to the devotee taking the order of the spiritual master as his or her life and soul. That's what one should be focusing upon with single-minded intelligence. The order or the desire of the bona fide spiritual master. So, and he commented, he said, you just cherish that order. You just try to follow that order, and Krishna will provide everything. He said, in one of his talks, he said, how could anyone know that Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati would appear in this world, that I would appear in this world, that somehow or other we would meet, that somehow or other this order would be given, and that somehow or other I would come to the West and come to New York City, and that all you boys and girls would come. How would anybody know? But he said, my experience was, and my conviction was, that if I just try, then Krishna will provide. Krishna will make all arrangements, like it's stated in Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Kshemam Vahamyaham. Krishna says for his devotees, he'll provide everything that's necessary. So he would be speaking like this to his disciples on the occasions of these talks on the disappearance day of his Guru Maharaj. And he would ask the devotees, said, you American boys and girls, you've taken up Lord Chaitanya's mission. Please become more serious about it. And he said that here in Los Angeles. I kind of noted that please become more serious about it. I mean, we're trying to do something that's good, but we should try to become more serious about it. He also said, keep pushing on this movement. So at least we've done that. We've kept pushing on. It's now, how many years is it after the disappearance of Srila Prabhupada? 45, 46 years. And yes, the boys and girls who are now old ladies and old men are still pushing this on. So it's the same message to the younger devotees. You've taken up this movement, continue pushing it on, try to become more serious about it. And Krishna will give the intelligence, and Krishna will give the facilities to do that if the desire is there, if the single-minded determination to continue spreading this movement is there, then that will definitely happen. So these were some of the themes that Srila Prabhupada expressed in his talks to his disciples and followers on the occasion of his Guru Maharaj's departure. There were other things, he would mention about Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur. For example, that when he was a very young child, just a few years old, he once took a boga mango, a mango that had not yet been offered to the household deities, and he ate it. Or at least ate it partially, and his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, had told him, "Oh no, you shouldn't be doing that." And then, from that time on, he considered he wouldn't eat any mango. If mango were offered to him, he said, "I cannot take. I'm an offender." So for his entire life, he didn't eat mangoes anymore, which is quite a sacrifice. Devotees tend to like mango. I remember in Florida, in one of the old temples there in the late 1970s, early 1980s. I was there, late 1970s, 76. We had a temple which had 40 mango trees on it. And when mango season came and these huge mango trees were providing hundreds and hundreds and thousands of mangoes, the devotees would be in ecstasy. And they would have for the prasadam, the Sunday feast, mango sweet rice, mango chutney, mango smoothie, mango lassi, mango this, mango that. But Bhaktisiddhanta, he wouldn't ever take mango. Of course, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we learned that for once after the devotees had engaged in Sankirtan for a long, long time, Lord Chaitanya manifested a mango tree that provided mangoes with no skin, no seed. If you have a mango and you're trying to use it, you've got the thick skin to contend with and the seed, but Lord Chaitanya manifested with almost very, very thin or no skin and very, very small or no seed. And it would give the mangoes at any season. But Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, he renounced that. So these are a few of the themes that Srila Prabhupada would repeatedly make in his talks about his talks given on the occasion of his Guru Maharaj's disappearance day. Does anyone have any further glorification of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakura? Prabhupada? Yes, that's, I've read that. It's a bona fide account. I think they also wanted him to be president of the Bombay temple that they were opening. So, yes, Bhaktisiddhanta did say that. Yeah, he'll do everything. Just let him be for now. He'll do everything when the time comes. And, and this again is related to the things that Srila Prabhupada would say during these disappearance talks. So he did have that kind of independence. I mean, he was totally dedicated to Bhaktisiddhanta. He was dedicated to the cause of the Gaudiya Math. He supported them. He did things for them. So yes, he was very competent. But he had this order, this specific order to preach in the West in English. And like I had mentioned during the talk, he said, I didn't have any real direct plan, exact plan how I was going to do it, but I kept thinking about it, and I've read this among, in the Veda base, something that Srila Prabhupada said. He said once that I had this idea that I was going to make a lot of money, that a lot of money would be necessary for me to preach in the Western world. So as a householder operating a business, it was my idea, I'm going to accumulate a lot of money and then I'll go. He said, but Krishna had another idea. He said, no, you just go now, I'll provide. So he said there was a little bit of, and this is some transcendental insight, so he said there was some little disagreement between me and Krishna, but, on what he should do. And he would also sometimes recount in these talks on Bhaktisiddhanta's Disappearance Day how Bhaktisiddhanta appeared to him and dreamed, told him, you come with me. In other words, give up your householder life. And more than once, but at least that's information from other talks, but just in terms of what he was saying in these Disappearance Day talks, he definitely did mention it, and that he had to give up his business and family by Krishna's arrangement. He would recite a very famous verse, Yasyaham anugrinami harishita danam shanai. Krishna says, to the one I am merciful to, I'll take away their wealth. I'll take away any obstacle that's preventing them from serving me. So Srila Prabhupada said that, well, that happened in my case. And then when he came to the West, he wasn't thinking, I'm going to open up a storefront in the East Village in New York. He was thinking, and he did when he came, he wrote letters to the heads of the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. In other words, he was going to start at the top with the leading men, the leading personalities of this country. And that didn't happen. They wrote back, thank you very much for your inquiry. We don't support religion. We just give for social welfare and things like that. So then, he tried to get help from his godbrothers in India with the Gaudiya Math, who had some resources and some ability to arrange things with the Indian government. He approached wealthy people in India saying, okay, I'm here in New York City, I'm in America, I can see that the people here, there are prospects, they will flock to this movement. I just need some facility. I've got a building in New York that I want to buy, a fairly substantial building in a very respectable area of the city. I just need the money. I know you've got money you like to give for these purposes, but they wouldn't come through with it. So then, he just kept on in his own way and gradually attracted a few followers, and it was kind of, as it was going on, he just kept trying one thing after another, and then finally we have this International Society for Krishna Consciousness, started by some, as I said, by some boys and girls who are now old men and old ladies. So we're handing it over to the next generation with the same admonition, keep pushing it on, and try to become more serious about it.
Thank you. I'm really relishing hearing all these things. I think wasn't there an incident where Prabhupada was with Bhaktisiddhanta on the roof of the temple they got in Bagh Bazaar, and Bhaktisiddhanta, and as I said, I think this is related to the last thing you said. He said to Prabhupada, "There'll be fire in these walls." Maybe you could elaborate upon that and the significance of that in relation to the last thing that you were just talking about.
Well, Bhaktisiddhanta had started his movement also from scratch, basically. And in the early days, they had a small center at Ultadanga. That's the center that Srila Prabhupada went to in 1922 and first met Bhaktisiddhanta. But then, and it was a very, it's kind of a simple place. And later, as Bhaktisiddhanta's Gaudiya Math became bigger and attracted more followers and more wealth, they got this marble palace sort of temple in Bagh Bazaar. And so the conversation that you're talking about is related to that Bhaktisiddhanta had seen that the devotees, when they were gifted with this wealth, this opulence, this facility, didn't use it properly. Kind of instead of saying, okay, we've got this fantastic facility for preaching, let's go out and preach more and more and use the facility to spread Lord Chaitanya's movement even more effectively than they had been doing. They were fighting about who should get what room in the palatial Bagh Bazaar temple. I've never been there, so I don't know what it's actually like, but it's kind of described as that, as very palatial, and that they weren't carrying out the actual mission. And sometime I think Srila Prabhupada has said that Bhaktisiddhanta left because he wasn't very satisfied with how his disciples were handling things. So sometimes it's said like that. And as I mentioned, there was this episode that happened maybe sometime in the 1950s, I think it was, during one of the Disappearance Day celebrations for the Gaudiya Math. On the disappearance of Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Prabhupada just read out this scathing analysis of the state of the Gaudiya Math. The preaching is all gone, it's all finished. People are just living in their separate temples and this and that. Oh, brothers, why can't we gather together and rededicate ourselves to following the order, the preaching mission of Bhaktisiddhanta? A very scathing analysis. I think Tadit read some of that prayer or essay or poem, whatever it was. I forget what form it was in exactly. But she read that one during one of the previous celebrations here. So, yeah, there's that analysis that we have to remain dedicated to the mission in order to keep up the deity service, to keep up the preaching. Because Srila Prabhupada would sometimes warn, well, if you don't have that dedication to the order of the spiritual master, if you're not maintaining your sadhana and things like that, then you begin to think, why is my Guru Maharaj left me with this big headache? How are we going to maintain these deities and this worship and this preaching? And then everything will just dissipate. So, yeah, that warning is there. So, as I said, he did, I thought that statement is become more serious about it, given, I don't know if it was in this temple in 1968, we probably didn't have it by then, but wherever it was in Los Angeles, said become more serious. You're doing something that's very good, you're pushing on, but take it more seriously, improve. Okay, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakura ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki jai.